access to.
My next question, Robert, is it's an interesting one because millions, hundreds of millions of people have received a dose, right? So the question becomes, yes, it's an experimental vaccination or vaccine. The question is, how can the governments, and I say governments because it's a worldwide issue, not just a North American issue, right?
Absolutely.
The governments turn around and say, well, we've decided we're not going to pass this we're not going to approve this vaccination because it doesn't meet our requirement after hundreds of millions of people have been vaccinated.
You're dead on. Politically, they can't do it.
Right.
And this gets back to the consequences of what I call the noble lie. And the logic, what we've really had happen here, by the way, this emergency use authorization strategy where we really don't collect data on the people in terms of the safety during this phase, and we rely on this really kludgy, antique database system involving self-reports where we can't, here in the States, because of HIPAA, we can't couple people's medical records with the report that exists in VAERS to be able to really get a rigorous hunt on whether or not those are just temporal associations or are they functional associations. And just to illustrate, with the Ebola vaccine, what the government did is they used something called expanded access or expanded use access. And what that meant was that they created these massive clinical trial structures. And anybody that needed the vaccine would be enrolled in one of these open-ended clinical trials. And they would be treated as if they were in a standard clinical trial environment where their adverse events would be captured both through solicitation. That's, ring, ring, call center. How you doing? Did you have this, that, or the other thing?
Right.
And self-reporting or unsolicited adverse events. And the government, in their wisdom, decided not to do this, and they were hoping that they could kind of cobble together a bunch of different databases from the military and other things. That hasn't worked out so well, and anybody that works with healthcare databases knows why, because they all have their own little nuances in coding. This is a tech problem of harmonizing different databases, which most that are involved in computer technology understand exactly how painful that is. And so doing this in a rigorous way has turned out to be overwhelming to the CDC, which is not staffed by armies of Atlanta computer scientists, because they're all working, making 10 times the budget that CDC would have, right? Working for big tech. So that hasn't worked out so well. And so they're in a position where worldwide now, these different databases are uncovering safety signals. It seems almost daily, and having to wrestle with the what I call the noble lie, which is embedded, by the way. Someone recently on Twitter pulled out the Federal Register from 1984, an auspicious year, in which the government clearly lays out that largely for the polio vaccine campaign, any information about that raises concerns about the safety of that vaccine was to be suppressed, actively suppressed, circa 1984. And that has long been a public policy, as I mentioned, the noble lie, the idea that leaders and key public decision makers, public health leaders and government officials are justified in lying to the public for the common good. And I haven't read Plato, but I've learned a lot over the last few months about these things. And this traces back to the work of Plato, So it's sometimes called the Noble Platonic lie, and you can wiki it and find more than you ever wanted to know. But when you see the communication, the emails disclosed in the Washington Post of senior government officials that I'll not name, openly admitting that they've been lying to the public, for the public good, this is grounded in a Platonic concept that it's okay to do that for the common good, because people wouldn't accept vaccine should they actually know the full spectrum of risks.
Right.
And so the logic is that anybody that discloses those risks or discusses those risks is causing people to die because they haven't accepted vaccine. And so that gets into this latest Dirty Dozen stuff about a list of people that have been identified by the government as causing death because they are discussing vaccine safety risks. So this is happening worldwide. There are countries where physicians are being declared mentally incompetent for either raising these questions or for advancing or discussing repurposed drugs or alternative therapies for outpatients, for instance. And some of these physicians are actually being institutionalized for their mental instability for having done so. And they're definitely losing their licenses or their ability to practice. So that's what's happened, I think, here, if you'll forgive my venturing into this space.
Please. No, please.
We have this idea of enforcing the noble lie that goes back, clearly at least to 84, if not earlier, in public health. So this is almost a mid-century idea in American public health and worldwide. It's been carried forward through time without really being examined logically. Does this really make sense? Is this a good idea in the modern age where everybody wants to Google everything and find out anything they can? And if the pieces don't fit, or they feel like they are being manipulated and the information is being manipulated, then they go into what I call Lego conspiracy mode. There's all these little fragments of information like Legos that can be assembled to your favorite conspiracy. And that is actively happening because this is how people's minds go. Intelligent, thoughtful people are prone to, if they're not given the straight information, they're prone to fabricate stories of their own based on the little bit of information that they have. And that is actively happening, and it's driving the government nuts. I think that this idea of the noble lie and restricting access to information and disclosure is antiquated. I think that's really what's going on. Is we've had this intersection of horizontally integrated capabilities for information control that are amazingly powerful, that didn't exist even during the Ebola outbreak.
Sure.
So the trusted, if you want to look up Trusted News Initiative, it's not a conspiracy. It's actually a BBC press announcement, British Broadcasting Corporation. And there's this organization of major news media and tech like Facebook and Microsoft, etc., Google, that are integrated and were built as a system, an integrated system and consortium for purposes of resisting foreign disinformation campaigns during elections. And with the rollout of the vaccines last fall, there was a decision that this organization would be turned and used for this purpose of the noble lie of suppressing any information that was contrary to the established narrative. So that's why your YouTube will be taken down if you talk about things like ivermectin or vaccine safety that that involve concepts or discussion about information that is not consistent with the official World Health Organization party line or the CDC. And yet we all know, because we've lived it, that the CDC has flip-flopped multiple times, the WHO has flip-flopped multiple times, and other public health leaders that will be unnamed have flip-flopped multiple times and are actually quite open about it. They think that they've done it for a good reason. But that's, you get big tech and in the media all integrated. And now we have funding coming from Bill. This is all true. It's not a conspiracy.
Absolutely.
We have money coming from Bill and Melinda Gates and the Wellcome Trust that is flowing down and creating new pop-up fact-checking organizations that are really applying what we would traditionally call psychological operations concepts to craft public perception about all these issues and motivate the public to accept vaccine across all age cohorts.
Right.
And that's I think that what we really have. There's a lot of people that go down all kinds of rabbit holes about Davos and collusion and the grand scheme and the big reset and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just about a vaccine. That, I can't say that isn't true. I can't. I don't know the data. They don't invite me to Davos. I haven't sat on those meetings. I don't know that actually happened.
Right.
But I can see the structures, because it's all public, for this information campaign that is integrated, and it's very open and transparent. We have interlinks between big pharma like Pfizer and the press. So the chairman of the board of Reuters sits on the board of directors of Pfizer. I mean, it's all integrated now.
It's crazy.
And it's incredibly powerful for information control.
Absolutely.
And it's often, any of us that work in tech at all understand algorithms. And, I like to say artificial intelligence is the least intelligent of the various options there, right down to deep learning, right? Artificial intelligence is like the big hammer. It just hits things. And it's kind of stupid in a lot of ways. And so that approach, and that's what we're dealing with, is algorithm-based fact-checking, where you're comparing statements that may be nuanced with broad brushstroke statements that have been approved in the language approved by the World Health Organization or the CDC or the European Medicines Agency or fill in the blank National Health Authority. And there's other subtleties to this that are fascinating. If you don't mind my going there.
Absolutely, please.
Both of our sons are computer scientists.
Okay.
And fairly high end, even though they're young, and they make more money than I do. And one of them, who works for a company based out of Atlanta that does, distributes billions, literally daily, emails, and has all kinds of cool tools that I won't name.
Please.
But he had this conversation with us the other day about scattering cockroaches. And that metaphor is not very, it's not politically correct speech to use the metaphor of scattering cockroaches, but the concept applied to the Facebook decision to delete the user groups that had been established to discuss adverse events that people claim to have experienced about vaccines.
Yep.
Okay, so they deleted 150,000 people or something like that were all chatting about their experiences because they thought this was going to dissuade people from taking vaccine. When they did that, they essentially stomped on the cockroach nest or on the food that had attracted them, is the metaphor. And the cockroaches all scattered into other venues, Reddit or whatever, Instagram,
Sure.
blah, blah, blah. They were no longer aggregated in a single place where the government could have data mined that quite successfully to provide signals that they could then apply statistically to the CDC databases, because that's the core problem with analyzing these databases is multiple imputation statistically. You can't ask at a 95% confidence interval the broad question, is there any association of any of this stuff with vaccine? Because you get into a statistical trap when you do that. And you end up just statistically with 5% of the stuff, if you have a 95% confidence interval, being false positives. And you end up chasing the false positives. And it's wicked hard to get down to the true positives if you take that type of approach. So statistically, what you have to do is you have to have a hypothesis. Oh, I think that this is associated with cardiac events. And then you go looking for testing the hypothesis, and then you run into other problems like masking and confounding, because if you have a high baseline of, say, cardiac events in the older population, you'll never see the new events that trickle in from vaccines. But if you have a low incidence of cardiac events, say, in adolescents, you can see that signal quite clearly. Okay, so it doesn't mean that it's not happening in everybody else. It just means you can't find it statistically. So that's the kind of, now that we have this situation where we are sampling the worst possible type of data, self-reported, that cannot be associated or not associated, that it's previously, years ago, documented by a Harvard study that the VAERS database, this type of self-reporting, results in an undercounting of about 100-fold. So when you see Steve Hirsch with whatever hair he has left, with his hair on fire, about the number of deaths in the VAERS database, which cannot be fully attributed or ruled out as vaccine associated because of the structural problems. What's really setting Steve's remaining hairs on fire is that, I'm teasing Steve Kirsch in case he ever listens to this, is that that's probably a 100-fold underreporting of the deaths. Okay, based on previously peer-reviewed published research.
Sure.
So we're in, and as time goes by, and what's happened is that the governments worldwide have used these profoundly powerful tools of information control and population control in terms of knowledge and bias, to impose a bias on not just those that they wish to take vaccine, that there's no problems here. That same messaging and bias runs all the way through the CDC. And the CDC has it as a mission that they should comport with this overall logic that adverse events should not be openly disclosed, which is in direct conflict with federal rule and the common rule and the Nuremberg Code and all that stuff. But they believe they're doing it for the right reason. And that gets us to this weird situation we're in right now. And what's starting to happen is that the enough people are getting red pilled that they're starting all over the world. Intellectuals in particular are starting to say, this doesn't look right.
Yep.
And now the government, as you say with your question, has got a problem. And they can't lose legitimacy.
Right.
And yet, a fun fact, it used to be that 1% of the population had self-identified as anti-vaxxers, and now it's over 40. And, I put out twice, once on Twitter and once on LinkedIn, a comment, what happens to trust in public health if it turns out that ivermectin has efficacy, not perfectly effective, and is safe, and vaccines are not perfectly safe, which is the messaging we received. And both those went viral. LinkedIn viral means 20,000 people. Twitter, millions. But with just comment after comment after comment, we've already lost our faith in public health, in the WHO, the CDC. As I've said in other podcasts, what I'm concerned about is what happens after. And this basically, these people that have been labeled, gaslighted, pejoratively labeled as anti-vaxxers, it's a common slander, now are being, they're historic reservations about government integrity and the behavior of the pharmaceutical industries are being validated.
Right.
And I have people writing me and commenting all the time, I don't want my kids to take any vaccines now.
Right.
And so in this, I think that we don't have to go to the Davos controlling the world conspiracies. I think that the Occam's razor here is what we have is incompetence and groupthink, compounded by the acceptance of this historic logic of the noble lie and mapping it into a new technology and media space where the tools for controlling information that are now perceived as increasingly authoritarian are amazingly powerful.
Absolutely.
And people are waking up and seeing that, maybe for the first time, and saying, "Ooh, well, this doesn't feel right at all."
Agreed.
And in the politically, we didn't want to go political. What I find fascinating is that this is orthogonal to the classic left-right axis.
Yeah.
It is, the good news is it's allowing, what I'm experiencing, it's allowing people that traditionally have been in opposition under this left-right axis to be interacting.
Right.
And establishing what they believe is the world that they want to live in. And most of them are saying, no, we heard George Orwell loud and clear, and we don't want to go there. We don't want a ministry of truth, and we don't want newspeak, which is another way of saying politically correct if you think about it. And we're not okay with I think the real where the rubber hits the road is this logic of forced vaccination for infants through young adults and young adults returning to university. That isn't supported by the risk-benefit data. That was a long monologue. Thank you for letting me get it out.
No, thank you. Do you believe that the government